Order. If God is with me, He will let me make the shot. Oh my! God is with me. There we go. That's the. You want? And I'm Anson, the recorder. Fiscal policy is a policy to help stabilize the economy. There is two types of fiscal policy: the discretionary, in which the government intervene to help economic growth, and non-discretionary, in which the automatic stabilizer to help stabilize the economy by itself. And when the economy is in a recession, we use expansionary fiscal policy, in which we reduce tax and we increase government spending to have better economic growth. And if the economy is in a boom or a surplus, we use contractionary fiscal policy, in which we increase tax but reduce government spending to have lower economic growth. And that's fiscal policy.
So fiscal and monetary policy is basically just two policy that would target different part of the economy to try to fix it. Monetary policy would be by the central bank, which they would try to one when they have limit reserve, they would sell bond or buy U.S. government bond to have either high money in circulation or low money in circulation, or or they can do reserve ratio, which they can like increase how much fund they can keep in the reserve, so they can loan out high money, or they can increase the discount rate, which is the interest rate that they would charge on loan. And monetary policy is very direct and would deal with inflation and employment and try to control that part. While fiscal policy is the central government trying to control spending, taxes. They would use like stimulus to try to pump money into the economy, or they would like try to pull money out by like increasing tax but lower their spending on like defense and stuff. And when and when the when the economy is doing too good, what the central bank would try to do is they would on the expansionary monetary policy graph, they would increase. They will lower the administrative rate, which would lower federal fund rate, which would um, deal with like very high employment and the economy is doing very bad, so they have to step in to try to make the economy better. Or if there's contractionary, it the like that's very high inflation or rising inflation, they would try to increase the administrative rate, which would increase the federal fund rate. And for fiscal policy, there will be two people arguing. One of them will be Keeson, like his view on the fiscal policy will be different from classical, but they'll ultimately agree on one would go on it can shift downward or shift right. One of them is interest on reserve, which would be like how much the Federal Reserve would pay commercial bank to hold, like however much money they give to them. Or a thing I thought about before is the administrative rate. is interest rate that will be set by the Federal Reserve rather than be determined by the, and it can affect interest rate but only by a little bit. And the central bank will conduct monetary policy by doing like increase the discount rate, buy bond, sell bond, or they can increase their reserve requirement. If there's ample reserve, there will be more reserve going in with the central bank, and this have little to no effect on the money supply and on the interest. Um, the central bank would like when there's ample reserve like this, they would use interest on reserve, which is the main way of trying to change employment. I mean, change inflation and trying to control the economy. Now we move into the graph. Um, demand. There's a inverse on the reserve market model. There's an inverse relationship between the federal fund rate and how much reserve they would demand. Um, and another thing is the discount rate would be the maximum rate that the bank is willing to pay to borrow money. If the federal fund rate is higher than how much they're willing to pay, they would just borrow from the Fed rather than from the actual bank. At a like really low federal fund rate, bank will have an incentive to just deposit the extra fund into the Federal Reserve, and the bank will have extra reserve to cover their duty, and they can earn interest on reserve. And on the reserve market model, as you can see, limit reserve be to the left or ample reserve be to the right, because that's how like much demand they will have in the power. But when there's limit reserve and the central bank buy bond from bank, it will shift supply to the right and bank will have more reserve and interest rate will decrease. But if there's ample reserve and the central bank would buy bond, it still will shift supply to the right, but interest rate doesn't change. And the way the bank decrease rate is they decrease in interest on reserve and the discount rate, which will lower demand down. And if they want to increase the rate, they'll increase interest on reserve and the discount rate, which would increase demand up. And overall, the point is that like open market operation, discount rate, reserve ratio will be used when there's limited reserve. But when there's ample reserve, the main one is interest on reserve that'll be used. And to conclude, the fiscal policy and monetary policy has the same goal in mind, but they would target different part of the economy to try to stabilize it.
Fiscal policy is used by the central government to stabilize the economy, but another policy to help stabilize the economy is the monetary policy that is used by the central bank and the Federal Reserve, which through the money supply and inflation rate help stabilize the economy, while fiscal policy use taxation and government spending in order to stabilize the economy.
Arise.